Welcome everyone to the next session of Ippn 2021. The session point 2 is being conducted at the auditorium, the presentation halls. At the presentation hall right now, we have the curated paper presentations on COVID-19 crisis being moderated and chaired by Kasturi Datta. In the presentation hall too, we have the papers on investment in human capital being chaired by Professor Rajiv Malhotra. And here at the auditorium, we have the very, very interesting aspect to be discussed, which is worker voice using technology to drive cultural change in the garment manufacturing industry. We have the moderator of the session, Ankita Nanda, Partnerships and Design Associate, Good Business Lab. As the panelists for the session, we have Arvind Patil, Design and Program Manager at the Good Business Lab. Sakshi Katyal, Senior Executive, Organization Development, Shahi Exports. Teresa Molina, Assistant Professor of Economics, University of Hawaii. Piyush Gandhi, Senior Research Associate at Good Business Lab. Thank you, panelists and moderator, for being here and for being a part of Ippn 2021. Over to you to take the discussions forward.
Thank you so much, Arushi. Hello, everyone. Thank you for those joining us today. Through this discussion, we are keen to understand how technology can be used to encourage further communication between factory workers and their management. We really hope that this panel can illuminate how this technology can be used to complement mechanisms around grievance redressal by ensuring accountability to the workers and increasing their trust. So in short, how can technology really be leveraged to ensure worker voice? On this panel today, we have representatives from academia, research, and business who have been affiliated with developing such a technology tool at Good Business Lab, a not-for-profit labor innovation company. We at GBL use rigorous research methods to find a common ground between worker well-being and business interests. And we believe that by building the business case to support better conditions for workers is the most sustainable way to transform labor markets and enable all workers to live dignified lives. Great. With that introduction, I'd like to kick off the panel and direct my first question to you, Teresa. So could you maybe start by elaborating on the reasons for studying worker voice in relation to worker well-being?
Sure. I think it's useful to kick this discussion off thinking about that because, even as someone who is interested in, worker well-being, it's not clear that worker voice would sort of jump to the top of priorities because there are obviously lots of other factors that you might want to think about. And so I think it's important to think about, what motivated our interest in worker voice. And a big part of this motivation was academic. So in 1970, Albert Hirschman outlined his thesis on exit, voice, and loyalty. And he essentially hypothesized that when workers, or actually in this case, he also thought about this in the context of citizens or customers. So basically when people are dissatisfied with their situation, there are kind of two things that they can do. They can either exit the relationship or they can voice their discontent and try to improve their situation. Now, this idea has received a lot of attention in the academic economic literature, but at the time that we were sort of thinking about this, there actually weren't a lot of direct tests of the hypothesis. There were lots of indirect tests looking at correlations between, for example, union and non-union workers, but not a lot of direct tests of voice specifically, and whether enabling voice could reduce exit.
Right, thank you for that. And you did mention that this hypothesis had not been tested especially directly in a factory setting. So could you maybe talk about the first phase of experimenting the value of worker voice for factory workers?
Yeah, the first experiment that I was involved in, which I think was also kind of the first experiment that our research team was involved in, was an experiment. Actually, let me take a step back. It was motivated by the anecdotal evidence that around the time of the minimum wage hike every year, there were lots of workers that quit. And the thought was that lots of workers during that time were maybe expecting higher wage hikes than they actually ended up getting, leading therefore to a lot of turnover. And so we wanted to see what would enabling voice, kind of in a turbulent time like this, what could that do to reduce that kind of behavior, or mitigate that kind of turnover. And so at the time we didn't have access to the cool technology that we have access to now. And so what we had was basically just an employee satisfaction survey. That was kind of what we started with. And we essentially what we did was to randomly assign some workers to receive that, to be, I guess, to take this employee satisfaction survey, to be given the opportunity to voice their opinions via this survey. Randomly assign one group to that and have a control group for comparison. What we ended up finding was that this simple tool, this satisfaction survey, actually did reduce quitting after the wage hike. And in particular, it reduced quitting the most for the most disappointed workers. So we collected data previously on what people were expecting their wage hikes to be, and the workers that were the most disappointed by that had the highest expectations, essentially, they were the ones for whom the treatment really worked. And so again, this was, I think, kind of striking that such a simple thing as an employee satisfaction survey could have effects like this. And I think that was surprising and kind of motivating at the time. But of course, it was clear to us even then that, as a tool for enabling worker voice, the employee satisfaction survey kind of left a lot to be desired.
Great. I'll move on to Piyush because you've been closely associated with the first introduction of a technological tool that increased communication between workers and the factory management. So maybe you could share the context in which such a tool was introduced and some of the initial learnings that the GBL team was able to gather.
Sure. That was a really nice introduction about the whole concept by Teresa. So as she mentioned that doing some surveys with the workers allowed them to vent out their disappointments, and just this thought would reduce their probability of quitting the firms. So we wanted to go one step ahead of this and wanted to check that in addition to these surveys, what impact does the positive corrective action by the factories have on these workers? So in addition to the surveys which we did initially, we also introduced a technology which allowed them to send their grievances anonymously to the factory management. So before launching the tool, our baseline surveys showed that about 1/3 of the grievances went unreported just because they were afraid of negative repercussions or did not know who to approach. So we partnered with TCP and Labor Solutions and introduced this tool known as VOVO or Worker Voice. And then we sort of trained the workers in a randomized controlled trial format and found out that the results were quite exquisite. The workers in the treatment group who were trained or who got awareness about this tool, they placed a lot of trust in the tool. They shared a lot of grievances. So just for context, there are other sources of grievance redressal as well. For example, suggestion boxes where the workers go and just drop in their suggestions, queries, or complaints. So during the period of this study, about 40 grievances were registered through the traditional methods, whereas in the new methods, it went up to about 10 times. About 360, 370 grievances were registered using this anonymous SMS tool. This showed that there was a need of these tools, and the business impacts also, like we always talk about the middle ground between worker welfare and business outcomes. So even in the business outcomes, we saw that the probability of absenteeism or the actual absenteeism reduced in the treatment group, showing that the surveys work, but also an additional impact could be the corrective action by the factories.
Okay. Thanks, Piyush. Just picking up on the last point that you made about the business impact of introducing such a technological tool. Sakshi, I would like to come to you next. And maybe to ask you to comment on how using a worker voice technological tool, which would, I assume, be in a departure from the traditional grievance mechanisms that the factory was used to operating with. So, in what ways did such a tool really replicate the function of these traditional grievance redressal mechanisms, but also maybe solve some of the problems that they pose?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Thank you so much, Ankita. I can just start by giving an introduction to Shahi so that the audience is also familiar with the environment where this worker voice tool is being implemented. So, Shahi is India's largest apparel manufacturer and exporter with over 50 factories which are working in a decentralized manner across 7 states. And we have
Sorry, Sakshi.
traditional.
I think there was a little bit of a pause. Maybe you could just repeat your last sentence for the audience.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. No, I was just mentioning about the traditional grievance redressal mechanisms like suggestion boxes, committee meetings. They do exist, but with these mechanisms, there is a limitation of quick, transparent, and easy interactions between the worker and the management. And over the years, we have realized over the years, and oftentimes they do not know how to approach to share their grievances. So, because of these existing challenges, we realized that introducing a new technology based solution like Vovo, which has an SMS feature, can allow workers to communicate with the management anytime and more importantly, anonymously. And this mechanism will also support the management in grievance handling. So, we were fortunate enough to find the right partners, TCT, Good Business Lab, and right opportunity to SMSs of using this tool. So this was actually the first time we were introducing a new technology-based third-party solution to the existing mechanism. I would not say it's a departure. It was actually an integration into the existing tools. So there was a lot of work to do because it was a new intervention. We had to train our key HR people on using the tool, how to communicate with the workers, how to send an SMS to the workers in a very positive manner. It also involved training of our workers on using the tool because it was an SMS based tool. We had to show the live demo because workers are coming from different backgrounds to different literacy levels. Especially focused on how to send an SMS, and we emphasized on the anonymity feature, which will actually overcome the disadvantage of other tools which are not which are not aligned for anonymity and quick and transparent grievance redressal solution. Talking about the experiences of using this tool, we realized that over a period of 7 months that this pilot was running, workers were interested to use this tool. In fact, they used it more than the traditional mechanisms like suggestion boxes. Youth has shared a qualitative insight that 40 cases were received in the suggestion boxes during that period. And on the other hand, through Gobo, we received around 352 cases, which actually showed that workers were interested to use a new tool. And there is a trust growing in this new system. From an HR perspective, we realized that HR people, since they were trained, they were feeling comfortable to use this tool. And in fact, they realized that the total number of complaints in the suggestion boxes surprisingly also increased as compared to the earlier period when this tool was not there. And overall, they shared that there was a positive cultural change in the team because to solve these grievances, they were actually interacting more with their peers. This was more proactive. On the other hand, I would say that there were a certain limitations with Vovo because it was an SMS based tool. It lacked a voice message feature. So if that feature had been there, there could have been more active factories over 7 states. So we have people coming from different backgrounds, different literacy levels, especially focused on how to send an SMS, and we emphasized on the anonymity feature as per our requirements, which can integrate different languages. and a tool which is also very cost effective. So just to conclude my remarks on this question, Ankita, I think realization, the benefits and challenges with the Vovo, we realize that we need a low cost and low technology solution which can be integrated into our existing mechanism with the special feature of anonymity, and that actually led to the realization that we need to develop a homegrown tool. In Ache, we'll be talking about that tool more in detail, which actually incorporates both voice calling and SMS feature to make usage inclusive for all kind of workers with different literacy levels. Yeah.
Great, thanks a lot, Sakshi. And I think there's a lot to unpack from the comments that you've shared with us. And I'm happy to explore them as the panel progresses. But coming to Enache, which is another worker voice technology tool that we have experimented with, Arvind, as someone who led the task of designing Enache, I would like for you to share, the various aspects of design thinking that you were able to use to create such a tool, which in some ways is separate from other existing worker voice technology tools in the market currently.
Hey, thanks, Ankita, and thank you, panelists, for setting up the context. So when we talk about worker voice, for many people, especially on the shop floor, it's an abstract idea, or it is perceived as a form of activism by many stakeholders on the shop floor, like factory managers, supervisors, right? So the understanding the perception about such new tool or technology or intervention was an important task for us to start this project. So what we did, we went to various stakeholders like the top management, board of director, the heads of various divisions who are engaged in managing the like 8 to 10 factories at least. Then we went to the factory managers, production managers. Um, we had a round of discussions with them, focus group discussions. We tried to understand what exactly they think about this new word, right? After that, we went to the workers. We did like 40 plus workers we interviewed. We had like 1 hour to 2 hour long semi-structured interviews where we tried to understand what exactly workers are seeking, what factory environment means to them, what they feel on the shop floor, how they react or respond when they are facing any conflicting situation on the shop floor. It's a tense environment, right? So there will be some clashes between the two uh, mm, groups, like workers or supervisors or two individuals also, right? So this is how we designed this whole research program through design thinking tools. And then uh, we came up with a workflow that ensures that what the needs and the needs of the users would be met, the latent needs, the hidden needs of the workers, we try to cater to them. And finally we did an exercise of interpreting the tool, right? So this is how the tool traveled this journey from worker voice to Inache. It was a branding exercise or perception changing exercise. Um, After that, just introducing a software or a digital tool is not sufficient. You need to design or devise an ecosystem around it, a product service ecosystem. So what all things we did? We designed incentive programs, right? So maybe Piyush will talk about it more, what exactly incentive program is, but what should be there in the incentive program. These things were identified through design thinking workshops, then capacity building workshops. Sakshi mentioned about it. Previously, people were receiving 40 cases in 6 to 7 months. Now you are receiving 300 plus cases. The volume is very large. How will you manage it, right? Then the the workers are expecting response in minimum amount of time. How will you respond to them? What nudges you can design for the users, like users in the sense the respondents, the HR executives, right? So all these nitty-gritties were figured out through this design thinking exercise. And finally, you need to communicate your value propositions to various stakeholders, right? So, by understanding their motivations, hesitations, and drivers, we designed various workshops for each stakeholder community, and we had sensitization workshops for management, then training workshops for the or awareness workshops for the supervisors and the workers on the shop floor, and so on. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks, Arvind, for that explanation. I think one of the salient points that has come across all the panelists, discussion points is that something like a technological tool in itself is for itself to achieve the intended goal is very hard. It does drive so many norms and cultural changes that the factories are used to operating in. So just to move the discussion forward, I think something at GVL that we do believe in is that one of the cornerstones is that designing any intervention or tool is really testing out its efficacy in the real world, right? So Teresa, coming back to you, could you maybe share with the audience on how the usability of Enache was really evaluated and what were some of the research questions we were keen to answer?
Yeah, I'll start with the research questions. In some ways, they're very straightforward, right? Because our goal is to figure out, as you said, do these tools work? And so with this particular tool, we wanted to know how did the availability or access to this tool affect worker productivity, worker attendance, worker retention. That ties back into the whole exit voice hypothesis. How did it affect worker satisfaction with the management, perceptions of the management, et cetera, et cetera. And so in addition to just understanding how the tool affected these outcomes, Arvind also mentioned that we are interested in how incentives could potentially moderate that effect, and specifically incentives for HR to do a good job, to respond well to the grievances that they were being faced with. And so we have these two because there were these two features or these two angles that we wanted to look at, what we're doing now, so you asked how Enache was evaluated, we're in the process, I would say, of evaluating it right now. How are we doing that? Well, we're running a randomized control trial. We are randomizing at the factory level. So that means that we have factories that have the tool, factories that are in the control group, and factories that have the tool as well as this new incentive structure for HR. And so with these three groups, essentially what it's going to come down to is going to be our analysis is going to come down to comparing the treatment to the control to the treatment plus incentives group. It'll be sort of a combination of a bunch of different comparisons of these different groups. We have data on the worker outcomes that I mentioned. We're collecting data on the worker satisfaction type variables that I mentioned. And so all of this is going to lead to hopefully a nice comprehensive evaluation of the tool. And I do want to just make a quick point on this. I mentioned that we're running a randomized control trial. I think something like this, it's becoming more and more clear that these types of methods are helpful and maybe even necessary to really get causal and valid evaluations of the tools that we're interested in learning about. It's tricky to set, if you implement a new policy change or if you implement a new program in a factory, it's hard to evaluate those effects if you don't have this kind of randomization. There are lots of other changes that are going on at the same time as these types of programs. And so, so in that sense, we think this randomized evaluation is going to be really important for us to get to sort of that correct answer, that correct evaluation, if you will.
Thanks. Piyush, as someone who's been working closely with the evaluation, are there any initial observations you want to share? Since, like Teresa mentioned, the evaluation has not been completed yet, but we're in the process of doing the different stages of the experiment.
Yeah. So some of the learnings which we also took from our previous project, which is Vovo, was that the time to resolve the grievances was a bit higher than what Shahi intends to be, which meant that either the technology was new or that there was a lot of workload on them. So we talked to a lot of managers. They said the technology part was not an issue, but the prioritization was there. So then we went on to design the incentives. That is there something we can do to incentivize them to reduce this average time of redressal? So this is one thing which we are noticing since the incentives were launched. The average time to resolve the grievances has come down. So this means that the team is working a bit more proactively. Other thing we are learning is that in the earlier tool, the Vovo tool, there was no functionality of a voice note or voice call sort of thing. And in our surveys, we got to know that not all people have smartphones or not all of them can send an SMS correctly. So we introduced this voice note, anonymous voice note facility in this tool as well. And we now see that we have received over 3,000 cases in past 13, 14 months, and over 75% of them are in voice notes form. So this is another interesting aspect, especially when we talk about the garment industry, where not a lot of people are using high-end technologies. They like just a random fact that about 50% of them don't even own a smartphone, and not many of them have completed their 10th standard of education. So this makes it very important that we introduce this voice feature as well. This can be used in any of the regional languages, and we are seeing that especially in South India, a lot of them are more comfortable speaking up to the managers in their mother tongue. So yeah, that voice note feature is important. And some other learnings were that we do not want to push for the buy-in, but we want it to grow organically. So this Inache tool also allows us to create some customized reports for the factory management, which provides them continuous insights each month or each quarter, that what is the status of the grievances, how many of them have been solved, what is the type of grievances they are getting, and also the performance of incentive reports. So this creates an organic buy-in, and so the factory is not involved in this part of study did approach us that they also want this tool. This also helps them in the compliance issues. So these are some of the positive aspects coming out of Inache, and we'll be happy to share the results once the trial ends soon.
Thanks, Piyush. I think that's really fascinating. The point that you mentioned about not wanting to push such an intervention or technology, but really grow this organic buy-in. And I think Sakshi would be able to comment best on this, especially when it comes to the implementation aspect of any such technology, right? Sakshi, maybe for the audience, you could elaborate on who are the different stakeholders within the factory whose inputs I would say are necessary to make such a tool successful. Uh, have they been able to share some of their initial learnings or experiences with the operation of Inache within Shahi factories? And since the time that Inache has been implemented in the few factories, has there been some sort of cultural change, something that we've spoken about time and again, when we think about grievance redressal as a bigger topic?
Yeah, I can start with a brief overview of the stakeholders. So at the level one, I think Arvind has also mentioned there are workers who are using this service, and at level two we have HR and organizational development team members who are actually playing a very crucial role in the design, testing, and implementation of any new worker well-being program in the factory. So they are kind of service providers to the workers. And then a level up in the hierarchy is the management people, production in charge, floor in charge, without whose cooperation, I would say, understanding and integration of a new mechanism into the existing system is actually not possible. And talking about the cultural change, yes, definitely, Ankita, we have seen a positive change in the grievance handling process with the implementation of NRCA. And I believe a tool has to be well designed in order for substantial engagement from the worker side. And some of the initial results from NRCA, the they show that there is a good engagement from the worker side. In terms of perception, I'll just share my anecdotal experience. Initially, they were just using the tool to send hi, hello, testing type messages. They were just trying how this new technology works. So a lot of cases in the initial phases of the launch were miscellaneous cases where there were no messages, blank text messages or blank voice calls. But slowly, gradually, people started developing trust in this tool. Now they are using it to share their actual grievances. There are queries related to their wages, queries related to transport system, opening of factories, especially during the COVID time. Now we have started receiving actual complaints. Just to share an interesting fact here, since the tool has been launched in 2019, we have received over 2,800 cases across 38 factories, and majority of the cases, I would say 75% of the cases are through voice calls. That means people are developing trust in this system. And the point that I talked about earlier was people are coming from different backgrounds. So not everyone knows how to send an SMS, but voice calling feature is very easy and simple to use. So they are using the voice call feature more to share their grievances, queries, or suggestions with the management. And an interesting overview of the other quantitative facts is that we did a comparison of number of cases received in INACHE versus other mechanisms like suggestion boxes. So from one of the divisions of Shagi, which is called Ladies Specialty Division, which has a cluster of 8 factories, over a period of 1 year through INACHE, we were able to get around 420 cases, and as compared to the other suggestion boxes, we were able to get 27 cases. So I would say more grievances doesn't mean that the factory is doing something wrong, but rather it's a positive sign that our grievance redressal systems are working well, which can be a huge advantage for us, considering the size and scale and the spread of our factories. Um, from management's perspective, initially they felt that Inache is just digital recording system. Everything is being recorded on a digital platform. Whatever query or suggestion is coming in, we have digital records. But gradually, their perception is also changing because they feel that with the digital records, they can analyze the trends, what types of cases are coming in, what are the root causes, so they can also predict future risks. So it's not just a digital tracking system, it's also a learning for all the HR people to see what are the loopholes in the existing mechanisms and how can we do better to solve our grievances.
Yeah, thanks, Sakshi. Piyush, maybe you could comment a little bit on just how the tool has been perceived by workers. I know Sakshi's been able to share some anecdotal evidence to show that there is growing trust, especially in the last year where there were instances of increased grievances because of COVID and lockdown. And has there been any evidence to suggest that their comfort with using technology has increased over time, and they've been able to think it's a manageable way in which they communicate with their supervisors and the factory management?
Yeah, we did see a positive impact on the workers even in the Bobo project. So, uh, just for context, it was a randomized control trial where half of the workers were given the awareness and training about this tool, and half of them did not get this training. So when we compared the two groups, the trust levels were significantly higher in the treatment group who did get the training and awareness programs, whereas the trust levels in this tool were not as high in the control group. Uh, Although the awareness was like upwards of 50% in both the groups, which means that uh, just the awareness does not translate into the usage, but it is the trust and confidence in the tool which helps in driving up the usage of the tool. So we did see a significant difference in workers. They placed a lot of trust in the tool, and 92% of the cases came from the group which had the higher trust in the mechanism. So yeah, there is growing evidence. As Sakshi said, this is a learning curve for the workers as well. Initially, they're a bit hesitant to try out this new tool. So a lot of the grievances also came from unregistered numbers. For example, they would use their family numbers or change their numbers frequently just because they were not sure if they were being identified at the back end or not. But once this fear went away, the usage went up and the trust levels were significantly higher.
Okay. Sakshi, if you could maybe respond to how uh, businesses, in this case Shahi, deals with or responds to such research insights where there's growing evidence of the usage of a technological tool, which in some ways is a clear departure from the norms with which the factory is used to operating in.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Ankita. So actually, research is not always easy to understand, but with our work with GBL, through the results of pilot in phase 1 and phase 2, it informed the design thinking approach we required to develop a strategy for Enache. And we got the research insights from the VOVO trial. We measured worker satisfaction and subjective well-being, and also how comfortable HR people will be to use another tool. So now in phase 3, which is called Enache, based on GBS research, we have designed this incentive program like Arvind has also talked about earlier. So just to put it simply, I would say for businesses like Shahi, research, especially the kind of research GBL is doing, it informs us how to design a program, how to test it and scale up while identifying the workers' needs, who are the actual beneficiaries, and also the factors which affect the company's bottom line, like we studied absenteeism, attrition, and productivity in the phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And historically, I would say GBL and Shahi have worked together on several worker well-being initiatives. So I think these initiatives and the results are tested and proven concepts for the wider industry to adopt and scale up, and also demonstrate to key stakeholders that these programs have business benefits.
Right. So we got the business perspective of how they deal with these research insights. Maybe, Arvind, you could talk about how working with businesses informs our research better, and how, in this instance, we've managed to understand the political economy of the factory a little better.
Mhm. So this in this fast-paced business world, I see research as an opportunity to reflect on past experiences, and businesses should try to engage in such activities where they can reflect on their past experiences and try to incorporate insights to design mindful strategies for their internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders. This is my one man's view. And talking about the political economy of the factory, we did an interesting exercise of systems mapping, where you identify the stakeholders, you identify their motivations, hesitations, and factors that drive their decisions, right? And what type of or the nature of transaction happening between two stakeholders, like how worker is interacting with the supervisor, right? It's a give and take relationship. Something must be happening, right? So all those nuances. Then how factory manager is interacting with the supervisor. So we ended up in identifying two interesting loops: conflict loop and peace loop. How supervisors, workers, production staff, they are stuck in the conflict loop, right? Because they have daily targets to achieve, they have to produce quality work within a limited time frame. So obviously there will be some clashes, and that's the red zone in the factory when you see the organogram of the factory. And at the same time, there exists a balancing loop in the factory where workers try to interact with welfare officers, HR executives, medical officers, right? Where they go to them, they try to share their issues, share their problems. But even this peace loop is not effective to solve the problem. The problem still exists, right? So there is a need to come up with some effective, trustworthy, and transparent mechanism, right? So all these insights, it inform the complete program design for this project Inache. This was first point about political economy. Then, as Sakshi mentioned, our industry collaborator Shahi Exports, they own 50 plus factories in India. Each factory, the context is very unique, right? The number of people engaged in welfare activities for the workers, it varies from 2 people per factory to 12 people per factory, right? So we had to consider all these facts in the existence of the factories and constraints of their culture to design the tool, and SOPs were co-created with the representatives from these factories.
That sounds like a lot of extensive work that has gone in and a lot of thinking behind creating and driving cultural change. So, how do we make this conversation sustainable? How so? In Arche is one example where there is an intervention, a technology-led intervention that has been introduced. And right now, like Arvind has mentioned, how Good Business Lab has been working closely with Shahi in terms of coming up, identifying pain points, coming up with SOPs that could be applicable to different contexts. But our hope, or at least the initiative, is that in some time this tool can be scaled up to all Shahi factories and can also be taken to other contexts, say apart from the garment manufacturing industry. So actually, maybe you would be the best to comment on how tools like this can be scaled up and how can the scale up really be made sustainable.
Yeah, I think this is my personal thinking. In order to be successful and scalable, I believe we would need dedication from both the parties, the workers who are the beneficiaries and the management team who are actually the service provider here. So fortunately, in every Shahi factory, we have a dedicated organizational development team that has expertise in designing implementation of various worker well-being programs. So the role of OD team, organizational development team, has been instrumental in implementing in Arche, because we just can't launch a tool, implement it initially, and just leave it. We have to continuously nudge the workers to use this tool. We have to design awareness programs, communication strategy, so that with increasing trust from the workers and increasing utilization of the tool, the entire program can be successful. Another point that I talked about was about buy-in from the management. I think it needs complete integration into a company's culture, because Shahi has been implementing several worker well-being initiatives in the past. I would say our factory management and teams are quite open to try new initiatives and support experimentation. So this kind of cooperation and collaboration between corporates and factory teams within the manufacturing firms are actually crucial for implementing technologies like Vovo or Enache. And if I talk about scale-up plans from Shahi's perspective, I believe we adopted a phase-wise approach. We didn't go all out and launch in all 50 factories together. So we implemented in 14 factories, and then in the second line, another 14 factories. So ultimately, I would say our plan is to roll out in Aceh across all our factories and even in our fabric processing mills. And as we grow and learn with this, we are also trying to establish dashboards and reporting systems for the factory at every level, maybe monthly dashboards, quarterly reports, so that the management can see what type of grievances are coming in, what are the root causes, what is the trend so far, what is still there is transparency at every level, there is transparency at every level. So we try to mitigate risks through these kind of reporting systems. And another important feature that we would like to add in Inache is digitization of other grievances which are being received through suggestion boxes, helpline numbers, and worker committee meetings.
Thanks for sharing those insights, Sakshi. Just kind of circling back to a conversation that Piyush had alluded to, and Arvind, you've also mentioned that the design of an RA has required a very deep insight, not into the life of factory workers, but also the larger workings and stakeholders within the factory. And Inache was really designed keeping user experience at its core. So through the evolution of the tool with its implementation phase wise, how has user experience shaped its features, and is there some kind of feedback mechanism through which the tool can, basically solve certain issues that might have cropped up initially?
Yeah. So as Sakshi mentioned, we took a phase-wise approach. So we tested first version of the beta version of the tool in 3 Shahi factories for 3 to 4 months, and the feedback from those users, it informed the development of first version of the tool. So just to quote an example, previously we used to have like 10-15 types of cases, and that's it, right? So through this pilot testing, we got to know about the whole spectrum of cases that workers would be sending to us, how to categorize those cases to create effective and efficient standard operating procedures so that the resolution time can be minimized. Apart from this, on regular basis, we interact with the factory users. We have constituted a Inache help desk within the Shahi ecosystem, and the help desk people, they try to assist the users to resolve their queries on time to time basis. And typical queries are about technical glitches in the software, then service down, then how to resolve a particular query. So for that particular piece, we have collaborated with a legal consultant, right? To and through with the help of this legal consultant, we conduct capacity building workshops on regular basis for all the users, right? So this is how we have created this communication loop or feedback loop within the Shahi ecosystem, which is not visible to the workers or other users, but that ensures the tool is functioning properly. And feedback from this group is being incorporated in designing the version 2 of the tool, because current tool is designed for feature phones, and we want to develop app version or like kiosk version, right? Because technology is changing, and users are also adapting new devices. So yeah.
Right. Great. So I will pose my last question, and this is open to all the panelists here, and it kind of goes back to the larger theme of this panel. Uh, Now that we have tried out, or we are testing the implementation of such a technological tool within the factory setting, can we maybe talk a little bit about both the benefits, and we've spoken enough about the benefits, but also the challenges that come with such tools that enable worker management and communication within the factory setting. And I really open up this question to all of you, and encourage you to answer from your different perspectives.
I can talk about one aspect, like so the tool is using telecommunication services, right? And the technology over there is changing rapidly. Like couple of years back, it was 2G technology, 3G technology, and now we are exploring 4G and 5G technology. Parallelly, the devices that workers are using, they are not compatible to these technologies. They are compatible to 3G technologies, 2G technologies, right? So I suspect this may affect the overall functioning of such tools. It's not just about Inache, but overall all the customer care services where this marginalized population is using feature phones, right? So there is a threat that they will be sidelined from this whole exercise. And I don't know how to answer this question, or how tech companies can create more affordable and accessible products for such population.
Thanks for sharing your insights, Arvind. Sakshi, would you maybe want to respond from your perspective about the challenges or the constraints maybe about that technological interventions bring forth?
Yeah, I think, Ankita, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I can share some challenges. So we have experienced through this implementation that technology can be an enabler, but it's not a solution to everything. It's not a silver bullet. Like I said, we just can't implement a program and leave it. So to build trust among the workers and the management, we have to adopt a change management strategy. A strong communication strategy has to be designed specifically, which can be built into the organizational culture. We would definitely require the dedication and commitment of the OD team and the top management, because because it involved a lot of trainings, awareness sessions, improving the efficiency of the tool, so that when the tool is completely embedded into the organizational culture, it can actually generate return on investment through workplace outcomes. And I would also, from Shahi's perspective, I would like to share some benefits of this technology-enabled tool, especially in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, when people are actually avoiding in-person discussions. So this tool is really helpful because there is no limitation of time. People can coordinate with the management anytime. Mostly we have seen workers are using after office hours to share their grievances or suggestions. So there is no time limit, and the most important feature I would say is the anonymity and easy access. And I think our management has also shared that this tool has created digital transparency. So now Shahi's management has a digital way of knowing workers' concerns in each factory, and also tackle the root causes of the problem by analyzing the trends. And a very interesting fact from a supplier's perspective is that Shahi is one of the very few suppliers in the world who are having this kind of technology-enabled communication tool. So this has also the potential to get higher compliance scores from our customers. Just to share an example here, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we were having a virtual audit by potential new customers. So we were showing our factories through a virtual way, and we demonstrated Inache tool to the customer. And it led to them think that Shahi has very good grievance redressal mechanism. We are thinking about smarter ways about worker management communication. This tool demonstration actually led to higher compliance scores for that particular factory, and fortunately we onboarded that customer, and I think I can dedicate the success to Inache tool. So all these benefits are there. I think Shahi can have a first mover advantage if we implement such tool across all our factories.
Thank you, Sakshi. I think the conversation, and especially the last question, in some ways demonstrates the work that GBL reinforces, which is that we are constantly trying to find out a middle ground between worker well-being and business interests, which can really make both stakeholders, function well and cooperate well and coordinate well. So I think on that note, I would end the questions from my end and thank all the panelists for answering and sharing their perspectives. Arushi, are there any questions from the audience?
I was trying to get to that, but I understand there are none. It was really an interesting panel discussion, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the insights that you all, gave to our audience. And I'm sure the audience has benefited a lot from all the knowledge and your own experiences in the sector. Thank you once again, everyone, for being here on this panel.